She was building her cabin alone until a lonely cowboy rode into her life heartwarming love story. Maeve stood on the edge of the vast, desolate land, staring out across the rugged hills. The wind whispered through the dry grass, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the horizon. It was a beautiful sight, but to her, it felt empty. This was supposed to be her new beginning. Her fresh start away from the crowded, noisy cities on her homeworld. The inheritance from her late aunt had given her the chance to build her own life on this remote frontier planet. She had always dreamed of owning land, of living simply and quietly, away from the chaos of civilization. And now, she had it. She had everything she needed, the land, the skills, and the determination. But even with all that, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness. She had spent weeks building the cabin on her own. The walls were up, and the roof was halfway finished. Maeve's hands were rough from the work, and her muscles ached from the long days spent in the sun, hammering nails, cutting wood, and assembling pieces of her future. There was no one to help her, no one to share the long days with. And at night, when the stars filled the sky, she felt the weight of solitude more than ever. She had no one to talk to, no one to share a meal with, no one to laugh with. Her aunt had passed away years ago, leaving her this land, but Maeve hadn't expected the quiet to be this overwhelming. Sure, she had built this life on purpose, but now, with the work nearing completion, she realized how much she missed human connection. Even the animals on this planet kept their distance, and the silence seemed to press in on her from all sides. Maeve paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow. She looked down at her hands, calloused from the hard labor. She had learned a lot in the past few months. How to fix machines, how to terraform the land, how to build a house from the ground up. It wasn't easy, but it was her dream. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do this. Yet the quiet, the emptiness, crept in like a shadow. It wasn't just the cabin that needed to be finished. It was her heart. A sudden rustling sound in the distance broke her thoughts. Maeve turned her head, squinting against the setting sun. At first she thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then she saw it clearly, a figure riding across the land, a man mounted on a horse. His silhouette was sharp against the orange sky, moving slowly in her direction. Maeve's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to visitors, especially not out here. She had been alone for so long that she wasn't sure how to react to another person. But curiosity got the best of her, and she grabbed her tool belt and walked toward the stranger, cautious but intrigued. As he drew closer, she could see he was a cowboy. A true cowboy. The dusty trail of his boots was worn, his hat low over his brow, and his face was weathered from years of travel. He wasn't like the people she had left behind on her homeworld, where everything was fast-paced and full of noise. This man looked like he had been on the road for a long time, just like her, but for very different reasons. The cowboy slowed his horse as he approached her cabin, stopping just a few yards away. Maeve stopped in her tracks, eyeing him carefully. He tipped his hat in a slow, deliberate motion, revealing a face hardened by time, but with eyes that held a kindness she hadn't seen in months. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and calm, like a breeze sweeping through the open plains. "Evening. I'm looking for some water. Ran into a bit of trouble with my ride," he explained, nodding toward his horse. "It's not far, but I could use a hand." Maeve hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers, especially ones who appeared out of nowhere. But she had enough water to spare, and it would be nice to talk to someone, even if just for a few minutes. "Sure," she said, walking over to the water tank beside her cabin. She filled a small container and handed it to him. He took it with a nod of gratitude, drinking deeply. "Thank you," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I'm Cole, by the way." "Maeve," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "That your cabin?" Cole asked, looking over at the structure she had spent so many long days working on. Maeve nodded. "It's almost finished. A few more details, and it'll be done." "You built it all by yourself?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. She smiled softly. "Yep. Took me a while, but it's coming together." Cole looked impressed, his eyes scanning the cabin and the land surrounding it. "That's mighty impressive. I've been on the road a long time, and I can't say I've met many folks who could build something like that from scratch." Maeve's smile faded a little. "I've had a lot of time to learn." "Doesn't mean it's easy, though." "You don't look like you're slowing down," Cole said, his tone warm. Maeve glanced down at her hands, the muscles in her arms aching from the work. She hadn't slowed down, but there were times when the weight of it all felt too heavy. "It's just me out here," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's a lot of work, and sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for it." The wind stirred the dust around them. and for a moment it felt as though the entire planet was holding its breath. "You look like you're doing just fine," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Don't doubt yourself." Maeve looked at him, meeting his gaze. For the first time in months, she felt like someone understood, even if just for a moment. "Thanks," she said softly. Cole tipped his hat again, then glanced toward the setting sun. "I'd better get moving, but I'll be around, Maeve. If you ever need help, or just someone to talk to, I'll be here." Maeve nodded, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone into her life, but the thought of having company, of sharing her world with another, felt like a small spark in the dark. "Thanks, Cole," she said as he turned his horse toward the trail. "I'll keep that in mind." As the cowboy rode off into the distance, Maeve stood at the edge of her cabin, watching the fading light of the day. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel so alone. Cole hadn't lied when he said he'd be around. The next day, Maeve woke to find him standing near the edge of her property, his horse grazing nearby. He wasn't riding, just standing there, gazing out at the land. Maeve was used to the quiet, but this was different. He was like a shadow on the edge of her new world, a presence that tugged at her curiosity. She had expected him to disappear like any other traveler passing through, but there was something about Cole that made him linger. "Morning," Maeve called out as she stepped out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her work shirt. Cole turned at the sound of her voice, his face breaking into a small smile. "Morning, Maeve. Thought I'd come by and offer a hand with the work. I've got a few hours free." Maeve felt an odd stir of reluctance mixed with gratitude. It was kind of him to offer, but the idea of having someone work alongside her, especially someone she didn't know well, made her nervous. She had grown accustomed to being on her own, and she wasn't sure how to navigate this new dynamic. "I've still got a lot to do around here," she said, her voice a little quieter than usual. "But I'm managing just fine." "I can see that. You've done more than most folks would in half the time." He walked closer, his boots kicking up dust with every step. "I just thought it might be nice for you to have a bit of company." Maeve hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the doorframe. "I'm not sure I'm used to company." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze soft but knowing. "I get it, been on my own for a long time too." He paused for a moment as if considering his words carefully. "Sometimes it's good to have someone around, even if it's just for a little while." Maeve studied him, unsure of what to say. She had never been one for small talk, especially with strangers, but something about Cole's presence felt different. There was no pressure in his offer, no expectation. It was simply a gesture, one that made her feel less isolated. "All right," she said, nodding slowly. "You can help with the roof. I could use an extra set of hands." Cole smiled and nodded, walking toward the ladder propped against the cabin. "Lead the way." As they worked, the hours passed without much talk. Maeve had always been more comfortable in silence, focusing on the task at hand. Cole seemed content with the quiet, his movements steady as they worked together to secure the roof. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows as they worked side by side. Maeve found herself growing more comfortable with each passing moment, the presence of the cowboy next to her oddly reassuring. Once the roof was done, they sat on the porch for a break, both wiping the sweat from their brows. Maeve handed him a canteen of water, watching as he took a long drink. "So, what brings you out this far?" she asked, her voice softer now, no longer so guarded. Cole looked over at her, his gaze distant for a moment before he spoke. "I've been wandering for years."
"Never stayed in one place too long."
"The work I do, well, it doesn't keep you tied down. I've been from one corner of the galaxy to the other, doing whatever I can to make a living. Sometimes it's building, sometimes it's fixing, sometimes it's other things." Maeve nodded, understanding more than he realized. The loneliness that came with a wandering life, the need to keep moving, to never settle too deeply into anything, was something she knew all too well. "And you just keep moving?" Cole's gaze flickered away, focusing on the land stretching out before them. "Yeah. It's easier that way. Keeps the past from catching up with you." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "And it keeps you from getting too attached to anything or anyone." She could hear the weight in his words, the history that lay just beneath the surface. There were things he wasn't ready to share, things he probably wouldn't. She understood that. After all, she wasn't one to open up either. Instead, she gave him a small nod, acknowledging his silence without pushing for more.
"I get that," she said, her tone even.
For a moment, the two of them sat there, the quiet between them not uncomfortable, but natural. The wind blew gently, the sound of distant birds filling the air as they both settled into the stillness. Maeve didn't feel the need to fill the silence with words, And for once, it didn't feel lonely. She didn't mind having Cole nearby. After a while, Cole stood up, brushing the dust from his pants. "I should probably get going," he said, looking out toward the horizon. Maeve stood as well, wiping her hands on her shirt. "Thanks for the help today." "Anytime," he said with a small smile. "I'll be around if you need anything. Just holler." Maeve watched him as he mounted his horse, the setting sun casting a warm glow across his face. For a moment she was reminded of the way the land had felt to her when she first arrived, vast, empty, full of potential, but also so very lonely. She didn't want to admit it to herself, but the idea of Cole leaving left a strange ache in her chest. "I will," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He tipped his hat and gave her a nod before turning the horse around, riding off into the distance. Maeve stood there for a moment longer, watching him disappear beyond the hills. As the evening sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Maeve found herself alone again. But this time, it didn't feel quite so empty. The days grew warmer as the weeks passed, and with each day, Maeve's cabin took shape. The walls were solid, the roof secure, and the small garden she had begun was starting to show signs of life. But it was more than just the cabin that was changing. Something inside Maeve was shifting too, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She had never expected the cowboy Cole to become a part of her life. He had come into her world like a sudden gust of wind, at first a disruption, then something that stirred the air in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Every time he came by, there was a quiet understanding between them. He worked beside her without asking questions, always with a gentle presence that felt oddly comforting. It had been a week since Cole had helped her with the roof, and every day he seemed to find an excuse to stop by. Sometimes it was to check on her progress, other times he brought supplies he thought she might need. Once he brought a box of seeds for her garden. Another time a bottle of homemade cider he had found in a small settlement not far from here. Maeve never asked for the help, but she accepted it. And in doing so, she realized something she hadn't let herself think about before. She was starting to look forward to his visits. The way he smiled when they worked together, the way his eyes sparkled when he spoke about his travels. It all made her feel a little less alone. One evening, as they worked to finish the garden, Cole noticed that Maeve was moving slower than usual. Her steps were heavy, and she kept pausing to wipe her forehead, as though the simple task of planting seeds was draining her. "You all right?" Cole asked, his voice soft but concerned. Maeve straightened, dusting off her hands. "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." Cole studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "You've been working a lot. Maybe you should take a break." Maeve shook her head, her smile faint but firm. "I don't want to stop now, not after everything I've done." "I know," Cole said, setting down his tools and stepping closer. "But sometimes you need to slow down. You can't build a whole life without taking a breath every now and then." Maeve was silent for a moment, staring at the ground. She didn't want to admit that he was right. She had been pushing herself so hard, keeping herself busy so that she wouldn't think about the emptiness she had felt when she first arrived. If she kept working, if she kept moving, maybe she wouldn't have to face the loneliness that crept up when the sun set and she was alone in her cabin. "I don't know how to stop," she murmured, more to herself than to Cole. He watched her quietly, his expression softening. "You don't have to stop forever. Just for a moment. You deserve that." Maeve didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between them, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet ache in her chest. It wasn't a painful feeling, but it was something unfamiliar. A longing. As if sensing her hesitation, Cole took a step back. "I'll tell you what," he said with a grin. "How about we call it a day and go for a ride? I'll show you some of the land nearby. It'll give you a chance to see what's out there, maybe give you a new perspective." Maeve raised an eyebrow, surprised at his suggestion. "A ride? Do you think I'll be able to keep up with you?" Cole chuckled. "I'll go slow. Promise." For a moment, Maeve hesitated, her instincts telling her to keep working, to keep building. But then, something shifted inside her. The thought of riding through the wide open spaces, feeling the wind on her face and the freedom of movement, was oddly tempting. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe she needed to take a break. "All right," she said, finally agreeing. "Let's go for that ride." They saddled up and set off toward the rolling hills that surrounded Maeve's land. The sky was clear, the sun dipping lower in the sky, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. Maeve felt a sense of peace as they rode side by side, the quiet of the land wrapping around them. Cole led the way, his horse moving gracefully through the open terrain. Maeve followed, surprised at how natural it felt to be on horseback. She hadn't ridden in years, but the movement felt familiar, like something she had always known. Beautiful, isn't it? Cole said after a while, his voice calm. Maeve glanced around, taking in the view. The hills stretched out before them, dotted with clusters of trees and wildflowers. The land was vast, empty, but it was beautiful in its own way. It is, Maeve replied softly. I didn't expect it to feel so peaceful. Cole smiled, glancing over his shoulder at her. It's the quiet. Sometimes that's all you need to hear what you're really thinking. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds being the gentle clop of hooves on the dirt and the breeze rustling through the grass. Maeve felt her shoulders relax, the tension she had carried with her for so long slowly melting away. She had never allowed herself to truly rest, but here, in this moment, with Cole beside her and the vast land stretching out before them, she felt something shift inside her. She felt like she could breathe again. After a while, they reached the top of a small hill. From there, Maeve could see the cabin in the distance, nestled in the landscape like a quiet little oasis. She smiled softly, a feeling of pride swelling in her chest. Cole rode up beside her, stopping his horse to look out over the view. This place suits you, he said. You've built something real here. Maeve turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Thanks, she said, her voice a little softer than usual. It's been hard, but it's mine. It feels like I've finally found a place I can call home. Cole met her gaze, his eyes steady. I can see that. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The connection between them, subtle but undeniable, was there in the silence. Maeve realized in that quiet moment that she had come to rely on Cole's presence more than she had ever expected. He wasn't just a visitor passing through her life. He was becoming a part of it. I'm glad you came, Maeve said, her voice almost a whisper. Cole's smile was warm, genuine. Me too, Maeve, me too. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the land, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the world change around them. Maeve wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt like it was worth looking forward to. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet peace Maeve had not known before. The cabin was nearly complete, and though there were still small tasks left to finish, Maeve found herself waking up each day with a sense of purpose and calm. But it wasn't just the cabin that had brought her peace. It was Cole. He continued to visit regularly, helping with the final touches on the cabin, teaching her things about the land and sharing stories of his travels. Though their time together had started with simple exchanges of help and company, it was becoming something more. Maeve could feel it, but she didn't want to admit it. Not yet. She had worked so hard to build this life on her own, and the thought of letting someone else in, of relying on them, scared her. Still, every time Cole smiled at her, every time they worked together or shared a meal in the quiet of the evening, she couldn't help but feel that her world was slowly shifting. She wasn't sure if it was the land or the man beside her, but something about the two of them together made everything feel right. One evening, after a long day of working on the garden, Maeve sat on the porch, her legs stretched out in front of her. She looked out at the land that had become her home. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. She had come so far, but there was still something missing. She could feel it in her chest, an ache she had tried to ignore for weeks. Cole had finished his work for the day and was sitting beside her, resting his elbows on his knees, looking out at the same view. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, comfortable. But Maeve couldn't keep the thought to herself anymore. You know, I never imagined I'd be here, sitting on this porch, with anyone, Maeve said, her voice soft but steady. When I first came here, it was all about the work, the cabin. I didn't think about what came after. Cole turned to her, his face lit by the golden light of the setting sun. He said nothing, just listened. Maeve was grateful for that. She didn't need him to speak, just to hear her. It's been harder than I thought, she continued, looking down at her hands. I thought I could do this all on my own, that I didn't need anyone. But it's lonely, Cole. It gets lonely sometimes. There was a long pause, and Maeve almost thought she had said too much. But then Cole spoke, his voice calm and kind. I know, he said simply. I've been alone for a long time too, Maeve. I've seen a lot, been through a lot. I thought I was better off that way, not needing anyone. But the truth is, it's not about what we think we need, it's about what we have in front of us. Maeve looked at him then, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of what he was saying. She could see the same loneliness in his eyes that she had felt in her own heart. It was like they had been living parallel lives, both trying to build something but always feeling incomplete. Cole, Maeve started, but she wasn't sure how to finish the thought. It was hard to find the right words. Cole smiled at her, a small, quiet smile, and stood up. He walked over to the edge of the porch, looking out at the land. I know what you're thinking, Maeve. I've been thinking the same thing, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone. Maeve's heart skipped a beat. She stood too, moving to stand beside him. The words she had been holding back suddenly felt clear in her mind, but she still wasn't sure if she was ready to say them. I don't know if I can let someone in again, Maeve confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I've been alone for so long, I'm not sure how to share this life with anyone. You don't have to share everything all at once. You just have to trust that you're not alone anymore. And that's enough for now. Maeve met his gaze, and something in her heart shifted. She had been afraid of needing someone, of letting someone else close. But Cole's words, his presence, gave her a sense of safety she hadn't realized she longed for. I've never been good at trusting, Maeve said, her voice trembling just slightly. You don't have to be, Cole replied, stepping closer. Just take it one day at a time. I'm here, Maeve, and I'll be here as long as you want me to. The air between them seemed to crackle with something unspoken. Maeve could feel her heart racing as she looked up at him. The distance between them wasn't just physical anymore. There was a space that had been left unspoken, a gap that had been filled with quiet understanding and the shared solitude they both carried. And now, for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was ready to be bridged. I think I'm ready to stop being alone, Maeve said quietly, taking a step closer to him. Cole reached out then, his hand brushing gently against hers. It was a simple touch, but it felt like everything. Slowly, as if testing the waters, he laced his fingers with hers. Maeve felt a warmth spread through her chest at the touch. She had been so afraid of opening her heart to someone, but now that she was doing it, it felt right. Maeve, Cole whispered, his voice low. We don't have to rush anything. But whatever happens, I'm here. And that means something, doesn't it? Maeve nodded, her eyes never leaving his. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them standing there, holding hands, as the sun dipped lower in the sky. I think it does, she said softly. I think it means everything. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Maeve felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time since she had come to this planet, Maeve felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.